Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we embark on a journey not through dusty archives or whispered rumours, but into the very heart of human imagination. Picture yourself, for a moment, in a quiet, lamplit room. Outside, the world is asleep, but here, with me, we're about to set sail on a ghost ship steering toward a city that may have never existed. The salt spray of a phantom sea mists your face. The ancient, impossible architecture of a long-lost civilization looms on the horizon, a place so fabled, so alluring, that its very name is a synonym for a hidden paradise. You feel the pull, the undeniable urge to know what secrets lie beneath the waves. This is a story of a city that vanished, a legend that refuses to die. Just a heads up, navigating this mythic ocean of contradictory theories and outright fantasy might make you question a few things. You probably won't survive this journey with your skepticism fully intact, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Then let me know where you are right now and what time it is. Post it in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story, of course, begins with a name that echoes through history like a forgotten song: Atlantis. It's a name that conjures images of magnificent temples, advanced technology, and a society that lived in harmony with the sea. But before we get lost in the romance of the legend, we have to start at the source. And that source is a Greek philosopher named Plato. Now, Plato wasn't a travel writer or a historian in the modern sense. He was a philosopher, a deep thinker who used stories to illustrate his ideas. He wrote about Atlantis in two of his Socratic dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, around 360 BCE, and it's here, in these ancient texts, that the myth we know so well is born. He describes Atlantis not as a myth, but as a genuine historical account passed down through generations. According to Plato, the story was first told to the Athenian statesman Solon by an Egyptian priest. The priest claimed that Atlantis was a naval power that existed thousands of years before Plato's time, located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. This was a magnificent empire, an island continent ruled by wise kings, descended from the sea god Poseidon himself. Their city was a masterpiece of concentric circles of land and water, connected by canals and bridges, all shimmering with gold and orichalcum, a mysterious glowing metal. They had a sophisticated legal system, a powerful army, and a utopian society that was, by all accounts, perfect. But, as with all good stories, a flaw emerges. The Atlanteans, in their prosperity, became arrogant and greedy. They started to wage war and attempted to conquer the rest of the world, including Athens. The Athenians, according to the story, valiantly repelled the Atlantean invasion, but the gods, seeing the Atlanteans' hubris, punished them with a cataclysmic earthquake and flood. In a single day and night of misfortune, the entire island of Atlantis sank into the sea, disappearing in the depths. And just like that, a civilization was erased from the map of history. It's an incredible story, right? A powerful moral fable about the dangers of pride and the impermanence of even the greatest empires. And for centuries, that's exactly how it was viewed. A cautionary tale. But somewhere along the way, people started to wonder if Plato's tale wasn't just fiction. Was there a grain of truth in his elegant narrative? Could a city like Atlantis have truly existed? The search for Atlantis has become a cottage industry for amateur archaeologists and enthusiastic explorers. People have proposed countless locations for the lost continent. Some have looked to the Mediterranean, pointing to the Greek island of Santorini, formerly known as Thera. Around 1600 BCE, Thera was home to a flourishing Minoan civilization, a highly advanced society with beautiful palaces and a complex culture. A volcanic eruption of unimaginable scale blew the heart out of the island, leading to a massive tsunami and a cloud of ash that blanketed the region. This event is a known, verifiable historical fact. Could this cataclysm, which destroyed a prominent Bronze Age civilization, be the real-world event that inspired Plato's story? The timeline is a bit fuzzy, as Plato's account places Atlantis' demise thousands of years earlier, but the destruction by earthquake and flood lines up with the Santorini event. It's a compelling coincidence. But wait, others say the location must be somewhere else entirely. Some theories point to Crete, another centre of the Minoan civilization, which was also impacted by the Thera eruption. The story of Atlantis' hubris, some argue, is a reflection of the Minoans' ultimate decline and their eventual subjugation by the mainland Greeks. Then you have those who look to less conventional places. There's the theory that Atlantis was in the Bermuda Triangle, a region we'll visit much later in our journey, where strange disappearances are a modern legend. The thinking goes that ancient Atlantean technology, powered by giant crystals, might still be causing magnetic anomalies and strange phenomena. It's a fun, quirky tidbit, even if it has no basis in reality. Still others have proposed locations as far-flung as the Canary Islands, Antarctica, and even the Sahara Desert, suggesting the city sank not into the sea, but was buried by shifting sands. This is where the distinction between history and mythology gets a bit blurry, doesn't it? Historians still argue whether Plato intended for the story of Atlantis to be taken literally. Many mainstream scholars hold the view that it was a purely allegorical tale, a philosophical device created to illustrate his ideal society. After all, Plato uses characters and conversations to explore his political and moral theories throughout his work. The story of Atlantis is a perfect example of a powerful civilization that falls due to its moral failings, a classic theme in Greek thought. It serves as a stark contrast to his ideal republic, a way of showing what happens when a society abandons virtue for power. But for every academic who dismisses it as fiction, there's someone else who sees it as a tantalizing puzzle, a search for a lost piece of the past. The myth of Atlantis holds a mirror to our own fears and desires. It speaks to the human fascination with civilizations greater than our own, with lost golden ages, and with the idea that our own society, for all its might, could one day vanish without a trace. It's a reality check. No matter how magnificent we think we are, nature can humble us in a heartbeat. Remember that humble crocodile dung sunscreen the Egyptians used? It seems so primitive now, but it was part of a powerful civilization that has also been largely erased. So, where does that leave us? Do we believe in a lost city beyond the waves, or do we see it for what it most likely is? A brilliant, enduring myth. The truth is, it doesn't really matter. The enduring power of Atlantis lies not in its reality, but in its ability to captivate and inspire. It has fueled generations of speculation, provided the backdrop for countless novels and films, and even led to genuine archaeological research. It reminds us that there are still mysteries out there, waiting to be solved, or at least waiting to be dreamed about. And sometimes dreaming is half the fun. Now let's leave the realm of myth and allegory and turn our attention to a mystery that is very, very real. A story with a flesh and blood hero, a true pioneer who flew into the clouds and simply vanished. I'm talking, of course, about Amelia Earhart. You know her name. It's synonymous with courage, with breaking barriers, and with a smile that was as bright and confident as her spirit. But it's also a name forever linked to one of history's most enduring unsolved disappearances. So, let's get comfortable, put on our metaphorical pilot's goggles, and climb into the cockpit of the Electra 10E for one final fateful flight. The year is 1937. Earhart, already a global icon, has one final frontier to conquer, the world. She's attempting a circumnavigational flight, a journey of 29,000 miles, in her custom-built Lockheed Model 10E Electra. She's not alone. By her side is her trusted navigator, Fred Noonan, a quiet, meticulous man with a reputation for being one of the best. They've already flown thousands of miles, crossing continents and oceans, and are nearing the home stretch. The final, and arguably most difficult leg of their journey, is a 2,556-mile hop from Lae, New Guinea, to a tiny, remote speck of an island in the Pacific Ocean called Howland Island. This is the moment of truth. On July 2nd, 1937, they take off from Lae. The weather is patchy, the radio communications are spotty, and the flight is incredibly long. Howland Island is just 2 miles long and less than half a mile wide. Hitting it is like trying to find a needle in an ocean-sized haystack. They're relying on celestial navigation, which involves using the sun and stars, and a little bit of radio direction finding. On the island, the US Coast Guard cutter Itasca is waiting, ready to guide them in. But as the hours tick by, a chilling series of radio transmissions from Earhart's plane begin to crackle over the airwaves. The transmissions are fragmented and increasingly desperate. "We must be on you, but cannot see you," Earhart's voice says, "but gas is running low. Have been unable to reach you by radio." You can almost hear the tension in her voice, the frantic search for that tiny island below. The Itasca crew can hear her, but she can't seem to hear them. They try to send messages to her, to give her a direction to fly, but either her radio is not receiving or she's too disoriented to get the signal. The last haunting message comes in at 8:43 a.m. local time. We're on the line 157337. We will repeat this message. We will repeat this on 6210 kilocycles. Then, silence. The plane, its pilot and its navigator simply vanish. This is not a tale of myth or legend, but of a very real person and a very real plane that disappeared from the face of the Earth. The US Navy and Coast Guard launched an immediate and massive search effort, the largest in history at the time. They scoured tens of thousands of square miles of the Pacific, but found no trace of the plane or its occupants. No wreckage, no oil slick, no life raft, nothing. Just an empty ocean and a missing hero. So, what happened to Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan? This is where the story and the theories begin to branch out wildly. The most widely accepted and frankly most probable theory is the crash and sink hypothesis. This theory posits that the plane simply ran out of fuel, either due to miscalculation, strong headwinds, or a navigational error. It would have ditched into the sea, where it would have quickly sunk to the ocean floor, thousands of feet below the surface. Given the technological limitations of the time and the vastness of the Pacific, it's not surprising that no wreckage was ever found. This is the conclusion held by most historians and the one that is most supported by the known facts. It's the least romantic, but perhaps the most logical explanation. But of course, a good mystery can never be so simple. The lack of physical evidence has fueled a number of alternative theories, some of which are, let's just say, a little out there. One of the most persistent and intriguing is the castaway theory. The International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, or TIGHAR, has spent decades researching this possibility. They believe that Earhart and Noonan didn't crash and sink, but instead made a successful emergency landing on a remote, uninhabited coral atoll called Gardner Island, now known as Nikumaroro, which is part of the Republic of Kiribati. They believe the pair survived as castaways for a short time before perishing. The evidence for this theory is fascinating, if not conclusive. In 1940, British authorities found a partial skeleton on the island, along with artefacts like a woman's shoe, a bottle, and a sextant box, which could have belonged to Noonan. The bones were initially dismissed as being male, but a 2018 forensic reanalysis of the original measurements concluded that they are more consistent with a woman of Earhart's height and ethnicity. It's a compelling, quirky tidbit, a small piece of evidence that seems to point directly to her. There have also been numerous reports over the years of radio distress signals being heard from the island in the days and weeks after the disappearance, which could have been Earhart's attempts to call for help using her aircraft's radio. Then there's the theory that sounds like something straight out of a spy novel, the Japanese capture theory. This one suggests that Earhart and Noonan weren't on a simple circumnavigation flight, but were secretly on a spy mission for the US government, flying over Japanese-held territories to photograph military installations. According to this theory, they were shot down or captured by the Japanese, either on Saipan or the Marshall Islands. They were then imprisoned and died in captivity. This is a very popular theory in some circles, fueled by eyewitness accounts from locals who claim to have seen a white female pilot and her navigator in Japanese custody around that time. The problem is, of course, a lack of concrete evidence. The US government has always denied any such mission, and no official Japanese records or remains have ever been found to support the claims. Historians still argue whether the most compelling evidence points toward a simple crash or something more complex. The crash and sink theory is supported by the lack of distress signals after the final broadcast, which would be expected if the plane had made a landing, but the castaway theory is bolstered by the artifacts and potential bone evidence from Nikumaroro. The Japanese capture theory, while the most dramatic, is the least plausible to most experts due to the lack of verifiable proof. What makes this particular mystery so compelling is that it's not ancient history. It happened within living memory. There are people who remember listening to those radio transmissions, who remember watching the news reports. It feels so close, so tangible, and yet, the truth remains tantalizingly out of reach. We know so much about Amelia Earhart, her life, her triumphs, her courage, but the final chapter of her story, the part that matters most, remains a blank page. It's a testament to the fact that even in our modern, connected world, with all our technology, the wilderness of the ocean can still swallow a person whole, leaving only a legend behind. Let's leave the boundless, blue canvas of the Pacific and step onto the swampy, sandy shores of North America. We're travelling back in time to the late 16th century, to a place that whispers a single, haunting word: Croatoan. This is the tale of the Roanoke colony, a story of pioneering ambition, a desperate search for a foothold in a new world, and a disappearance so complete it's become the stuff of legend. You've probably heard this story before, but tonight we're going to look a little deeper into the mystery, feel the chill of the unseasonably cool breeze coming off the Atlantic, and wonder what became of those 117 souls who vanished without a trace. Our story begins with Sir Walter Raleigh, an English gentleman with a taste for adventure and a desire to plant a permanent English settlement in the New World. He'd sponsored a couple of voyages to what is now North Carolina, and in 1587 he sent a third group to establish what he hoped would be a thriving city. This wasn't a military expedition, but a true colonization effort. The group included men, women, and even children. Their governor was John White, an artist and cartographer who had been on a previous voyage and knew the territory. He brought his own family with him, including his daughter Eleanor Dare, who was pregnant. Just a month after their arrival on Roanoke Island, she gave birth to a girl they named Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. It was a moment of hope, a symbol of a new beginning, but the good times wouldn't last. The colonists' initial enthusiasm was quickly dampened by a lack of supplies and mounting tensions with local Native American tribes. Seeing the desperate situation, Governor White made a difficult decision. He would sail back to England to gather more provisions and reinforcements. He promised to return within a few months. It was a journey he never wanted to make, a desperate gamble to save his colony. As he said his goodbyes, he left his family behind, trusting that they would be safe in his absence. He arrived in England in late 1587, ready to quickly organise a new fleet. But history, as it so often does, intervened. England was in a state of high alert. A massive Spanish fleet, the legendary Spanish Armada, was preparing to invade. Queen Elizabeth I ordered all ships, including the ones White needed, to be used for the defence of the country. For 2 agonising years, White was stranded in England, unable to return. The Armada was finally defeated in 1588, but the delays were catastrophic. It wasn't until 1590 that John White finally managed to secure passage on a privateer ship heading back to the Americas. Imagine what that journey must have been like for him. Every day on the water he must have been filled with a mixture of hope and dread. He was returning to his daughter and his granddaughter, the hope of a new nation. But he knew, in his gut, that 2 years was a very long time to be left alone in the wilderness. When he and his crew finally reached Roanoke Island, the scene was one of total desolation. The fort was deserted and overgrown. There was no sign of a struggle, no bodies, and no clues as to what had happened to the 117 men, women, and children. It was as if they had simply evaporated. But then, as White searched the settlement, he found a single solitary clue. Carved into a fence post at the entrance to the fort were the letters C-R-O. On a nearby tree, the entire word C-R-O-A-T-O-A-N was carved. White had previously instructed the colonists that if they were to leave the island, they should carve the name of their intended destination into a tree. If they were in distress, they were to add a Maltese cross above the carving. There was no cross. This was, at least in White's mind, a sign of hope. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, now known as Hatteras Island, and also the name of a friendly Native American tribe who lived there. White believed his family and the other colonists had simply relocated to join the Croatoans. He tried to sail to Croatoan Island, but a massive storm blew in, and the privateers, wanting to get back to their profitable raiding, refused to delay any longer. John White was forced to return to England, never to see his family again. The fate of the lost colony was sealed. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Roanoke colony, along with its 117 inhabitants, vanished. There is no doubt about that. The mystery is what happened to them. The Croatoan clue, while offering a tantalising possibility, has led to a number of competing theories. The most widely accepted theory, and the one that John White himself favoured, is that the colonists assimilated with the local Native American tribes. It's a pragmatic and entirely plausible idea. They were running out of food, they had to move, and they had a good relationship with the Croatoan tribe. The move would have been a matter of survival. Over the years, there have been a few scattered reports of later European explorers finding Native Americans with grey eyes or speaking English, but these stories are largely unverified. Still, the idea of peaceful assimilation, of the English becoming American in the truest sense, has a certain romantic appeal. It's the kind of quirky or fringe tidbit that, while not provable, seems to fit the narrative. But what about other tribes? Another theory suggests that the colonists split up. Some may have gone to Croatoan, while others went to live with the Chesapeake tribe. The Chesapeake tribe, however, was known to be hostile toward the English. A different group of tribes, the Powhatan Confederacy led by their chief Wahunsa-Nakau, or King Powhatan, lived further north. In 1607, English colonists arrived at Jamestown, Virginia, and established a new settlement. Captain John Smith of Jamestown later wrote that Powhatan had admitted to him that he had killed the Roanoke colonists. Some historians speculate that Powhatan saw the Roanoke colonists as a threat to his power and eliminated them. It's a much darker and unfortunately equally plausible theory. A fringe tidbit here. Some historians believe that Powhatan may have only killed the stragglers, and that some colonists, particularly the women and children, were spared and taken in by other tribes. There's also the possibility of a Spanish attack. Spain considered the English presence in North America an encroachment on their own colonial claims. They had sent expeditions to look for the Roanoke colony and destroy it, but no evidence has ever been found that they succeeded. No Spanish records mention a successful raid, and the Roanoke site showed no signs of a fight. So what's the truth? Historians still argue whether the colonists were assimilated peacefully, murdered by a hostile tribe, or were simply lost to the wilderness. The lack of a Maltese cross on the tree carving is the key piece of evidence that suggests they weren't in immediate distress. But it doesn't tell us what happened after they moved. Recent archaeological digs on Hatteras Island have uncovered 16th century artefacts that could have belonged to the colonists, including a sword hilt and a piece of slate that may have been a writing tablet. This evidence points strongly to the assimilation theory, but it's still not a smoking gun. It's a hint, a whisper from the past, telling us to keep looking. The fate of the lost colony of Roanoke is a powerful reminder that history is not a neat, tidy collection of facts. It's a story with missing chapters. We have the beginning, the arrival of the colonists, their hopes, their struggles. We have the end, a deserted fort, a single word carved into a tree. But the middle, the part that explains how they went from being a thriving community to a silent mystery, is missing. And until that missing piece is found, the question of what happened to the people of Roanoke will continue to haunt us, hanging in the air like a ghost. Let's turn the page now, from the mysterious outdoors to a baffling indoor enigma. This time, we're not looking at a missing civilization or a lost plane, but at a single, peculiar object. A book. A very old, very strange book known as the Voynich manuscript. It's a document that has stumped cryptographers, linguists and historians for over a century. A book written in a language no one has ever been able to read and filled with illustrations that make no sense. It's the ultimate brain teaser, a medieval puzzle box that remains stubbornly shut. So, settle in, because this story is less about finding answers and more about appreciating the glorious, beautiful confusion of a truly unique historical artifact. The manuscript gets its name from Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish book dealer who acquired it in 1912 from a Jesuit college in Italy. He was a keen collector and immediately realised he had found something extraordinary. The book itself is a small, unassuming thing, about 240 vellum pages bound in pigskin. But when you open it, you're greeted by a world unlike any other. The text is written from left to right, in a graceful, flowing script. But the letters are, well, they're not like anything you've ever seen. They don't correspond to any known alphabet, living or dead. It's a jumble of strange loops and symbols, and it has absolutely defied every attempt at deciphering it. It's a mainstream historical fact that no one has ever read a single sentence of it. But the text is only half the story. The book is also richly illustrated with colourful and deeply weird drawings. There are diagrams of what look like complex astronomical charts, but they depict constellations that don't exist. There are pages dedicated to plants, but these are not plants you'd find in any botanical garden on Earth. They are bizarre, fantastical flora with tangled roots, impossible flowers, and strange pods. The book also contains a section that appears to be a medical or pharmacological treatise, with illustrations of naked women bathing in what looks like a system of interconnected pools and pipes, all held together by some kind of otherworldly plumbing. It's an insane, fascinating mixture of science, fantasy, and who knows what. It's like a medieval comic book, if the comic was drawn by an alien who had only a passing acquaintance with human anatomy and plant biology. For decades, scholars have tried to crack the code. Some believed it was an elaborate forgery, a prank pulled by some Renaissance-era con artist to make a quick buck. But modern analysis of the vellum suggests it was made between 1404 and 1438, long before Voynich ever got his hands on it. The handwriting itself is too fluid and consistent to be a simple fake. It's the work of someone who was clearly very comfortable writing this script. So, if it's not a forgery, what is it? The theories are as numerous as the pages of the manuscript itself. One popular idea is that the manuscript is written in a lost or invented language. A fringe tidbit in this area is the work of a few cryptographers who use statistical analysis to study the text. They discovered that the language has a rhythmic structure, a certain consistency in the way letters and words appear that is more characteristic of a natural language than of a random cipher. Certain words are repeated, and the word lengths and frequencies follow a similar pattern to other languages. This suggests it's not gibberish, but a structured form of communication. Of course, this doesn't help with reading it, but it does suggest that someone, somewhere, knew what they were doing. Another theory is that the book is a cipher, a code where the symbols represent letters or words from a known language. The problem is, cryptographers have tried everything. They've used frequency analysis, which works on ciphers where the most common symbols correspond to the most common letters in a language like English or Latin. That didn't work. They've tried anagrams, a substitution based on a key, even a micrographic code where tiny invisible symbols are hidden in the letters. All have failed. The reason for the failure, some argue, is that the cipher is so complex that no one has ever been able to break it. Or perhaps the key to the cipher is so esoteric that we would never find it. A good joke in the cryptographer community is that the manuscript is just a very, very old to-do list for a hyper-organised but completely bonkers medieval person. Remember to draw more naked ladies in water pipes. Buy more dragon's blood ink. One particularly intriguing and equally frustrating theory is that the book is a steganography, which means hidden writing. The idea here is that the real message is hidden within the text, not by the symbols themselves, but by some other secret method. Perhaps the message is only revealed by looking at the first letter of every word, or the number of letters in each word. It's a maddeningly difficult puzzle to solve when you don't even know what you're looking for. And then there's the more esoteric yet equally compelling theory that the manuscript is a record of something we don't understand, something lost to history. Maybe it's a forgotten religious text, a magical grimoire, or an alchemical guide to making gold. The illustrations certainly hint at these possibilities, especially the bizarre plants which could be code for secret concoctions or remedies. The astronomical charts could be based on a forgotten celestial event, or perhaps they depict a cosmology that is entirely foreign to us. This is where the open scholarly debate phrase comes in. Historians still argue whether the manuscript represents a real-world scientific treatise, an allegorical work, or a complete and utter hoax. The current home of the manuscript is Yale University's Binecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library. They have it locked away in a climate-controlled vault, and you can only view it with special permission. But in a lovely nod to the modern age, the entire thing has been digitised and is available for anyone to view online. So you can spend hours, if you like, just scrolling through the weird drawings, looking at the incomprehensible words, and trying to solve a puzzle that has defeated the world's best minds. What makes this manuscript so captivating is its pure, unadulterated mystery. It's a tangible object from the past, a book that someone painstakingly wrote and illustrated, but its purpose and meaning remain a complete blank. It's like finding a message in a bottle from a ship that sank thousands of years ago, but the message is written in a language no one can speak. It reminds us that our knowledge of the past is far from complete, and that some of history's greatest secrets are hidden in plain sight, just waiting for the right person to come along and finally crack the code. Or maybe, just maybe, it's a very complicated, very old joke and the punchline is on us. From the incomprehensible scribbles of a medieval manuscript, we now go even further back in time to the dusty halls of the National Museum of Iraq. Our subject isn't a book, but a small, unassuming clay pot, and the question it raises is absolutely electrifying. We're going to talk about the Baghdad Battery, a historical artifact that has sparked more than a few arguments. Was it an ancient energy source, a device capable of generating electricity, or just a very, very strange container for scrolls? Let's find out, or at least let's explore why nobody can agree on the answer. The story begins in 1936, just outside of Baghdad, in a village called Kujat Rabua. A German archaeologist named Wilhelm König was excavating the site, which was a Parthian settlement dating back to roughly 150 BCE to 250 CE. He was sifting through the remains of a tomb when he made a truly bizarre discovery. He found a small 6-inch high earthenware jar or terracotta pot. Inside the jar was a cylinder made of copper sheet, and inside the copper cylinder was an iron rod. The iron rod was suspended inside the copper cylinder by a bitumen plug, a kind of asphalt. The whole thing was sealed at the top with another bitumen plug. It looked to König exactly like an early electrical battery. He published a paper in 1938 suggesting that the object was a voltaic cell, a simple battery, and that the ancient Parthians might have had a rudimentary understanding of electricity. The idea was that if you filled the jar with an acidic solution, like vinegar or grape juice, which would have been readily available at the time, the device would generate a small voltage. The copper and iron would act as the two electrodes, and the acidic solution would act as the electrolyte. It was a fascinating and deeply controversial theory. This is a mainstream historical fact. These objects were found, and they look for all the world like a battery. But what were they for? This is where the debate gets charged. If they were batteries, what were they used for? This is a question that has led to some pretty wild and equally fascinating speculation. One theory is that they were used for electroplating, the process of using an electric current to coat one metal with a thin layer of another, often more precious metal. Imagine a craftsman in ancient Mesopotamia taking a silver statue and using a Baghdad battery to give it a fine, gleaming layer of gold. We know that ancient Mesopotamian artisans were masters of their craft, and that silver-plated copper objects have been found in the region. The battery could have been a tool of their trade. This is a quirky or fringe tidbit, a kind of what-if, that, while not provable, adds an amazing layer to the story. But wait, if they were used for electroplating, why are there no records of this? No ancient texts describing the use of these devices? It's a very modern technology, and it seems strange that there would be no written record of its use. Another theory is that they were used for medical purposes. The ancient Greeks and Romans, and likely the Parthians, knew about the therapeutic effects of electric shocks from fish. The idea is that the Baghdad batteries could have been used to generate a mild electric current for pain relief, or to stimulate acupuncture points. Maybe the ancient equivalent of a TENS unit, just a gentle, shocking massage to soothe a sore back. A much simpler theory is that the batteries were used for religious or spiritual purposes. They could have been used to provide a mild shock to worshippers who touched a metal idol, a sort of holy shock that was meant to mystify them or prove the power of the gods. Now, let's look at the other side of the argument, the one that says these are not batteries at all. This is where most mainstream archaeologists and historians are. They argue that the objects were likely not used for any electrical purpose. The most popular alternative explanation is that the jars were used to store sacred scrolls, with the copper and iron rods acting as a kind of ceremonial support. The objects were found in tombs, which suggests they had a ritualistic rather than a practical purpose. The bitumen plugs could have simply been used to seal the jar to protect the delicate papyrus or parchment inside. A little bit like a historical time capsule. Then there's the even more mundane explanation. The pots and rods were just objects. Maybe the iron and copper rods were simply a mistake, a random collection of items that happened to be found together. Or perhaps the copper cylinder and iron rod were just a convenient way to hold and store something else inside the pot, and the whole battery idea is a complete red herring. It's a bit of a letdown, isn't it? The grand theory of ancient electricity being replaced by the mundane reality of a storage container. The debate is a perfect example of a phrase we hear often in history. Historians still argue whether the Baghdad batteries were true electrical devices, or simply ancient storage containers. The lack of any other similar artefacts and the absence of any historical texts is the biggest argument against them being batteries. If the Parthians knew how to generate electricity, why is there no evidence of the technology being used elsewhere? No workshops, no descriptions, no other examples. It's a great question, and it's the main reason that most scholars remain sceptical. However, in a quirky tidbit of our own, we should note that modern-day scientists and hobbyists have built replicas of the Baghdad battery, and they absolutely work. When you fill them with a weak acid, like a simple vinegar solution, they produce a voltage of about 0.8 to 1.5 volts. It's not enough to power a light bulb, but it is enough to electroplate a small object or maybe, just maybe, provide a very mild electric shock. So, the theory is plausible, even if the evidence is thin. Ultimately, the Baghdad battery remains a glorious and very specific mystery. It's a tangible object from the past that seems to defy our understanding of that time. Was it a glimpse of an unknown technology, a flash of genius that was lost to history, or was it just a jar with some metal bits in it? We don't know. And that is exactly what makes it so fascinating. It forces us to reconsider what we think we know about the past, and to remember that there are still so many gaps in the story of human history, gaps that may, one day, be filled by a little clay pot and a couple of metal rods. We've seen how a single artifact can hold a powerful mystery, and how an entire city can disappear into myth. Now let's widen our gaze to a global scale, to a time when entire civilizations didn't just vanish, they all fell, almost simultaneously. I'm talking about the Bronze Age collapse, a cataclysmic event, or rather, a series of events that brought an end to a golden age of international trade and culture. It's a mystery that makes the disappearance of one colony or one city seem small in comparison. So, let's travel back to a time of pharaohs, kings, and mighty empires, and watch them all come crashing down around 1200 BCE. For centuries before this, the Eastern Mediterranean, the Near East, and parts of Europe were a thriving, interconnected web of powerful kingdoms. The Egyptians were in their New Kingdom period, building monumental temples and tombs. The Mycenaean Greeks were building fortified palaces. The Hittite Empire in modern-day Turkey was a powerful rival to Egypt. The Babylonians and Assyrians dominated Mesopotamia. Everyone was trading with everyone else. We know this because of the extensive archaeological record. You'll find Mycenaean pottery in Egypt, Egyptian scarabs in Anatolia, and Cypriot copper ingots everywhere. It was a sophisticated, globalized world, a bit like our own, just with more chariots and less social media. And this entire thriving system was built on a single key commodity, bronze. Bronze is an alloy of copper and tin. Neither metal is particularly useful on its own, but when you combine them, you get a metal that's hard, durable, and perfect for making tools, weapons, and armour. Copper was plentiful in Cyprus, and tin was found in Afghanistan and parts of Europe. This meant that the flow of these two metals was the lifeblood of the entire interconnected world. It was a symbiotic relationship. If one of these empires went down, it had a domino effect on all the others, and that's exactly what happened. Around 1200 BCE, for reasons that are still hotly debated, the system imploded. Cities were burned, kingdoms were toppled, and writing systems like Mycenaean Linear B were lost. It was a cultural and economic dark age that lasted for over 400 years. The historical record for this period becomes incredibly sparse, a testament to how utterly devastating the collapse was. It's a mainstream historical fact that this collapse occurred, but the why is the mystery. So what happened? Was it a single event, or a perfect storm of multiple catastrophes? The theories are plentiful, and they all point to different kinds of disasters. One of the most popular theories involves a group of mysterious raiders known only as the Sea Peoples. We know about them from Egyptian inscriptions, which describe them as a relentless seafaring force that swept through the region, attacking cities and toppling empires. The Egyptians fought them off in a great sea battle, but not before they had already laid waste to many of the surrounding kingdoms, including the Hittites. We have vivid descriptions from the reign of Pharaoh Rameses III, who wrote of a time when the foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands. Who were these Sea Peoples? That's the mystery. Some historians suggest they were refugees from the collapsing kingdoms, now desperate and on the move. Others believe they were raiders from the Aegean, or pirates. The truth is, we don't know who they were or where they came from, but the Sea Peoples couldn't have been the only cause. An empire can't fall to raiders alone. The collapse was too widespread. Another major theory points to climate change. There is growing archaeological and paleo-environmental evidence that the eastern Mediterranean region experienced a long period of drought around the same time. The drought would have led to widespread famine, social unrest, and a weakening of the central governments. Imagine an empire trying to fight off invaders when its population is starving and angry. It's a perfect recipe for a collapse. Then there's the theory of earthquakes. A fringe tidbit in this area is the work of a few archaeologists who argue that the region was hit by a seismic storm, a series of massive, devastating earthquakes that hit multiple major cities. A few archaeologists have found evidence of widespread destruction in city after city, all dating to the same period. This would have caused widespread devastation, toppling palaces and fortifications and making the empires vulnerable to attack and internal strife. It's a compelling idea, but it's difficult to prove that the destruction was caused by earthquakes and not by invading armies. And what about internal factors? The Bronze Age was, as we've established, a hyper-connected, globalized economy. What happens when you put all your eggs in one basket? You risk a complete system failure. The disruption of trade routes, particularly for tin, could have crippled the entire system. Without tin, you couldn't make bronze, and without bronze, you couldn't make weapons and tools. The entire military and economic structure would have collapsed. This is where a little bit of that sarcasm comes in. Who needs a foreign invasion when you can't even make a decent sword anymore, am I right? A famine, a drought, or an earthquake could have been the final straw that disrupted the trade routes and brought the whole fragile system tumbling down. So which is it? Was it the sea peoples, climate change, earthquakes, internal rebellion, or the disruption of trade? Historians still argue whether the Bronze Age collapse was caused by a single, catastrophic event or a perfect storm of multiple factors. The truth is, it was likely all of the above. It's a bit like a Jenga tower. The Sea Peoples were a player who gave it a big shove, but the tower was already unstable, its foundations weakened by drought and internal strife, its blocks loosened by a breakdown in trade. When the shove came, the whole thing toppled. The Bronze Age collapse is not just a mystery, it's a lesson. It teaches us that even the most powerful, technologically advanced civilizations are not invincible. They are fragile systems, dependent on a delicate balance of trade, climate, and social stability. It's a sobering thought, especially when you consider our own modern globalized world. It's a reminder that history isn't just about ancient kings and forgotten wars. It's about the forces that shape civilizations, and the thin line that separates a golden age from a new dark age. From the grand, sweeping collapse of empires, we now zoom into a single, very specific disappearance that still haunts the American consciousness. We're leaving the Bronze Age and entering the gritty industrial world of 20th century America. The name is Jimmy Hoffa, and his vanishing act on a hot summer day in 1975 has become one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in modern history. It's a story of power, corruption, organised crime, and a whole lot of concrete. So, put on your metaphorical trench coat and let's drive to the side of a busy street in a Detroit suburb and see if we can catch a glimpse of the truth. James R. Hoffa was a force of nature. He was the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, one of the largest and most powerful labour unions in the United States. He was a champion of the working man, fighting for better wages and working conditions for truck drivers. But he was also deeply entangled with organised crime. He was known to have close ties to the mafia, and he was convicted of jury tampering and fraud in the 1960s, a conviction that landed him in federal prison. In 1971, President Richard Nixon commuted his sentence, with the condition that Hoffa couldn't engage in union activities until 1980. Hoffa, ever the defiant rebel, decided to fight that condition, and was planning to take back control of the Teamsters. This set the stage for his final fateful day. The date is July 30th, 1975. Hoffa, who was 62 at the time, was seen at the parking lot of the Mashus Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Hills, a suburb of Detroit, Michigan. He was there to meet with two men, Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano, a powerful New Jersey mafia figure, and Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, a Detroit mobster. Hoffa had a long-standing feud with Provenzano, and their meeting was meant to be a tense, high-stakes attempt at reconciliation. Hoffa, a man who had survived a lifetime of death threats, went to the meeting alone. He was last seen by eyewitnesses standing next to a car, talking to someone. The time was approximately 2:45 p.m, and after that, he simply disappeared. A mainstream historical fact is that Jimmy Hoffa vanished on this day and has never been seen again. His family waited, then called the police. The car he had been using, a green Pontiac, was found in the restaurant's parking lot. The police immediately launched a massive search, interviewing everyone who knew Hoffa and who had been in the area. The suspects were obvious: Tony Provenzano and Tony Giacalone. Both men had alibis, though, and while the police suspected them, there was never enough evidence to charge them with Hoffa's murder. The search continued for years, but the body was never found. This is where the mystery really begins. The lack of a body has fueled a number of wild and sometimes comedic theories about Hoffa's final resting place. The buried under the end zone of Giant Stadium theory is a personal favourite. The stadium was under construction at the time of Hoffa's disappearance, and for decades, a persistent urban legend held that he was buried beneath the concrete of one of the end zones. The joke became so famous that when the stadium was finally demolished in 2010, the FBI actually showed up with ground-penetrating radar to check. Of course, they found nothing. It was a funny, quirky tidbit, but it didn't solve the mystery. Another popular theory is that Hoffa was buried in a horse farm in northern Michigan. Then there was the claim from a dying mobster that Hoffa was dismembered, stuffed in a barrel, and buried in a New Jersey landfill. The FBI excavated the site, but again found nothing. The theories just kept getting wilder, with people claiming he was encased in a bridge support, or put through a meat grinder and served to an unsuspecting public in a Chicago hot dog stand. I mean, at some point you have to laugh at the sheer absurdity of it all. The most plausible theory, however, comes from a book written by a former mobster named Frank Sheeran, who claimed to have been the man who actually killed Hoffa. In his account, Sheeran, a close friend and confidant of Hoffa's, was the third man in the car that picked Hoffa up at the Mattress Red Fox. Sheeran claims he drove Hoffa to a house where he shot him in the back of the head. The body was then cremated. The story, while detailed, is still unverified. A fringe tidbit in this area is that the DNA evidence from a blood sample found in the house where Sheeran claimed to have killed Hoffa was too degraded to be conclusive. So, while Sheeran's story feels very real and has been adapted into a major Hollywood film, it still hasn't solved the mystery. So why did they kill him? The prevailing theory is that Hoffa, by attempting to regain control of the Teamsters, was a direct threat to the mob's control of the union's massive pension fund. The fund was a slush fund for organised crime, a piggy bank for loans to build Las Vegas casinos and finance other mob operations. Hoffa, with his powerful personality and his connections to a different generation of mobsters, was seen as a loose cannon who needed to be taken out. Historians still argue whether Hoffa's murder was ordered by a single mob boss or was the result of a conspiracy by multiple crime families. The truth is, there were a lot of people who stood to gain from Hoffa's disappearance. The old guard of the Mafia, the new guard of the Mafia, and even some of the Teamsters themselves who wanted to keep their power, all had a motive to get rid of him. The case remains officially open, a haunting reminder of the dark side of American history. The disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa is a perfect storm of history, politics, and crime. It's a testament to the power of a single person to inspire loyalty and fear in equal measure, and it's a testament to the fact that some mysteries, no matter how much time and effort is put into solving them, are simply destined to remain unsolved. The legend of Jimmy Hoffa lives on, a ghost in the annals of American crime, forever buried or perhaps cremated in a place we may never discover. We've journeyed from a missing union boss to a missing manuscript. Now, let's travel back in time, over 2,000 years, to the greatest empire the Western world has ever known, Rome. And within that mighty empire we find one of its most legendary and perplexing mysteries, the vanishing of the 9th Roman Legion. It's a story of military might, barbarian tribes, and a complete, almost supernatural disappearance. So, put on your metaphorical hobnailed boots and let's march north to the cold, wild frontier of Roman Britain, where a mighty army simply walked into the mists and was never seen again. The Roman Empire was, in its prime, a finely tuned military machine. At its heart were the legions, highly disciplined and highly effective fighting forces of around 5,000 men. The 9th Legion, officially known as Legionem Hispana, Spanish Legion, was one of the oldest and most respected. It had a long and storied history, fighting in Spain, Gaul, and then being deployed in Britain in the middle of the 1st century AD. It was a unit with a reputation for both ferocity and discipline. The mainstream historical fact is that the 9th Legion was last attested to have been present in Britain around the year 108 AD. After that, it simply drops out of the historical record. The first major clue we have that something went terribly wrong comes from a number of Roman records. The famous historian Tacitus mentions the loss of a legion in Britain, a loss that led to the death of some 6,000 men. He doesn't name the legion, but the timeline seems to fit. Then there's the fact that later Roman documents list the legions, and the 9th is conspicuously absent. It's almost as if it never existed. The silence is deafening. The last known evidence of the 9th Legion is a stone inscription at York, England, from 108 AD. After that, nothing. A new military unit was sent to replace them, but where did the old one go? That's the mystery that has baffled historians for centuries. So what happened to them? The most romantic and most popular theory is that the Legion was wiped out in a catastrophic battle on the northern frontier of Britain. In the early 2nd century AD, the Roman army was pushing further and further north into what is now Scotland, trying to subdue the fierce painted tribes known as the Caledonians. The Romans were building fortifications and roads, but the tribes were relentless in their guerrilla warfare. The theory is that the 9th Legion marched into this hostile territory and was caught in an ambush. A surprise attack, a superior number of warriors, and perhaps a particularly brutal winter could have resulted in a complete annihilation of the Legion, so complete that there were no survivors to tell the tale. This is a powerful and deeply cinematic idea. It's the central premise of several movies and novels, including the excellent The Eagle, which follows a young Roman officer on a quest to find the lost legion's eagle standard. It's a compelling, but ultimately unproven narrative. The evidence for this theory is largely circumstantial. The northern frontier of Britain was a dangerous place. The tribes were known to be formidable fighters, and the lack of any surviving records of the Legion after 108 AD fits with the idea of a total loss. But a full 5,000 men, a legion with all its support staff just vanishing without a single survivor. It seems a little too perfect. A fringe tidbit in this area is that archaeologists have found evidence of destroyed Roman forts and settlements in Scotland from this period, which could suggest a large-scale conflict, but there's no specific link to the 9th Legion. Now for a more academic and perhaps less dramatic theory. Historians still argue whether the 9th Legion was destroyed in Britain or simply transferred to another part of the empire and disbanded later. This is a much more mundane but ultimately more plausible explanation. The Roman army was constantly moving legions around the empire to deal with threats. The 9th Legion could have been transferred from Britain to another volatile border, perhaps in Germany or the Middle East. Perhaps they were moved to the Danube River to fight Dacians, or maybe even to Judea to help put down a Jewish revolt. Why would they disappear from the record then? Well, if they were decimated in a later battle, or if they were simply disbanded and their men reassigned to other legions, they would cease to exist as a unit. Their name and number would simply drop out of the official records. This explains the missing name, and it doesn't require a Hollywood-style ambush. Evidence for this theory comes from a few places. A Roman diploma found in the Netherlands dating to 120 AD mentions a veteran of the 9th Legion who was discharged in an area that was under Roman control but not in Britain. This suggests that at least some of the men of the 9th Legion survived past 108 AD and that they weren't necessarily in Britain when they were serving. Another quirky tidbit in this area is an inscription found in Spain that mentions a man who was an officer in the 9th Legion and then later went on to command another unit. The inscription is dated after 108 AD, again suggesting that the 9th Legion was still in existence in some form. So, which is the truth? Was the 9th Legion wiped out in a single cataclysmic battle? Or did they simply dissolve into the vast machinery of the Roman Empire? The answer is probably somewhere in the middle, or perhaps we'll never know for sure. The lack of a definitive answer is a testament to the fragile nature of our historical record. We have small pieces of evidence, a name on a list, an inscription on a stone, a line in a history book, but we don't have the full picture. The story of the 9th Legion is a powerful reminder that history is not a neat, tidy timeline. It is full of gaps and contradictions. It's also a powerful symbol of the Roman Empire's greatest strength and its greatest weakness. Its strength was its ability to control a vast and diverse territory with a highly disciplined army. Its weakness was its constant need to expand and its tendency to overstretch its forces, pushing them into dangerous hostile territories. The vanishing of the 9th Roman legion is a beautiful and tragic mystery. It speaks to the impermanence of even the most powerful human institutions. A few thousand men, a few hundred years, and all that remains is a question mark, a blank space on a map, and a legend that refuses to die. They are the ghosts of the Roman Empire, and they still march in our imaginations, forever lost in the cold mists of Britain. We've seen armies vanish and empires crumble. Now let's go even further back in time, to a period before written history, to a structure that has stood for millennia and still holds its secrets close. We're going to a vast green plain in Wiltshire, England, to stand before the colossal stones of Stonehenge. This is a mystery not of what happened, but of why. Why did people spend centuries building this massive monument? Who built it? And what was it for? This is a story of human ingenuity, ancient rituals, and a silent circle of stones that refuses to tell us its true purpose. The mainstream historical fact is that Stonehenge was constructed in several phases, beginning around 3000 BCE and ending around 1500 BC. So it wasn't built in a single go, but was a work in progress for over 1,000 years. The earliest phase involved the creation of a circular ditch and bank, with a ring of 56 wooden or stone posts, known as the Aubrey Holes. But the real showstopper came later, around 2500 BCE, when the massive sarsen stones and bluestones were brought in. The sarsen stones are the big ones, the ones that form the outer ring and the central trilithons, 2 uprights with a lintel on top. They are enormous, weighing up to 50 tons each. The closest place to find sarsen stones is about 20 miles away, at Marlborough Downs. But the bluestones are the real puzzle. These smaller stones, weighing up to 4 tons, were used to create a smaller inner ring. Geologists have pinpointed their origin to the Preseli Hills in Wales, a location over 150 miles away. Imagine that for a moment. People in the Stone Age, without modern tools, cranes, or even the wheel as we know it, moved these giant stones, somehow, over 150 miles of rugged terrain, across rivers, and then erected them with an astonishing degree of precision. It's an almost unbelievable feat of engineering. The question of how they did it is a mystery in itself, but the even bigger question is why. So what was Stonehenge for? The theories are as numerous as the stones themselves, and they range from the scientific to the spiritual. The most famous theory is that it was an astronomical observatory. This is a compelling idea because the structure is perfectly aligned with the sun on the summer and winter solstices. On the summer solstice, the sun rises directly over the heel stone, which stands outside the main circle, and its rays shine directly into the centre of the monument. On the winter solstice, the sun sets in perfect alignment with the main trilithons. This is a proven scientific fact. So, it was clearly used for marking the passage of the seasons, which would have been vital for a farming community. It could have been a giant calendar, a way for ancient people to track the seasons, predict solar events, and plan their agricultural cycles. But was that its only purpose? Probably not. The astronomical alignment is a mainstream historical fact, but it's not the complete answer. There are many other theories. One of the more recent and intriguing is that Stonehenge was a place of healing, a kind of prehistoric Lourdes. This is a quirky or fringe tidbit, but it's backed by some interesting archaeological evidence. Skeletons found in the area, some of which had travelled great distances, show signs of illness or injury. The bluestones themselves, those stones from Wales, were believed to have magical or healing properties in ancient times. So, the theory goes that sick or injured people would have made a pilgrimage to Stonehenge to be near the bluestones, hoping for a miraculous cure. It's a powerful idea, and it would explain why people went to so much trouble to bring the stones from so far away. Another theory, one that has gained a lot of traction recently, is that it was a massive ancient burial ground. This is a good example of an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of Stonehenge was astronomical, ritualistic, or mortuary. The discovery of thousands of human remains in and around the monument suggests it was used as a cemetery for hundreds of years. The bodies belonged to men, women, and children, and some of them had travelled from as far away as Wales, suggesting they were part of the community that built or used the monument. The fact that the remains of people from all walks of life were buried there suggests it wasn't just a place for royalty or the elite, but a sacred communal space. So was it a calendar, a hospital, or a cemetery? It could have been all three. It's a very modern way of thinking to assume a single purpose for a single structure. It's far more likely that Stonehenge was a multi-purpose monument that served different functions for different people at different times. It could have been a place for rituals and ceremonies, a place where people gathered for feasts and celebrations, a place where the living honoured the dead, and a place where they looked to the heavens to understand their place in the universe. And what about the people who built it? We don't know their names. We only know them by their tools and the monuments they left behind. They were part of a society that had a sophisticated understanding of engineering, astronomy and community. They were able to organise massive workforces and sustain them over a period of over 1,000 years. They had a shared vision and a deep connection to the land and the stars. The mystery of Stonehenge isn't just about the stones themselves, but about the people who built them. It's about a society that we will probably never fully understand. They left us no written records, no detailed instructions, and no clues as to their beliefs or their motivations. All they left us with is a magnificent, silent monument that stands on a plain, a testament to their ambition and a riddle for the ages. It's a reminder that some of history's greatest stories are not written in books, but are carved in stone, waiting for us to figure them out. From the silent, windswept plains of Stonehenge, we travel thousands of miles to a lush green plain in central China. We're going to a place called Sangqingdui, which means 3-star piles. Here, in the late 20th century, archaeologists made a discovery that completely upended our understanding of early Chinese history. They found a sophisticated, technologically advanced civilization that existed thousands of years ago, a culture that had no historical record, no mention in any ancient text, and which left behind some of the most bizarre and beautiful artefacts ever discovered. This is the story of a civilization that was simply forgotten. The story begins in 1929, when a local farmer in Sichuan province was digging a ditch and found some jade relics. But the full scale of the discovery didn't happen until 1986. That year, workers at a brick factory accidentally stumbled upon 2 sacrificial pits, filled to the brim with thousands of artefacts. What they found was truly astonishing. They discovered a treasure trove of bronze, jade, gold and ivory objects, unlike anything ever seen before in China. The sheer number of artefacts was impressive, but their style was even more so. The Sangqingdui civilization, which flourished from around 2800 BCE to 1000 BCE, was unlike any other culture of the time. The most striking artefacts are the bronze sculptures. There are dozens of them, including human heads with strange stylized masks and enormous otherworldly eyes. Some of the heads are covered in gold foil, and they have an expression that is both serene and alien. The largest and most famous sculpture is an 8-foot-tall bronze human figure standing on a pedestal. He's slender, with elongated hands, and wears a long, elegant robe. His eyes are hollow and seem to stare into the distance. It's a mainstream historical fact that these artefacts were found, and that their artistry and craftsmanship were unlike anything else from that period. But what were they for? That's the main mystery. The artefacts were found in 2 pits, but they weren't buried as part of a formal burial ritual. They were deliberately smashed and then deposited into the pits, almost as if they were part of a ritual sacrifice or a grand ceremonial bonfire. This suggests that the civilization ended in some kind of dramatic and intentional event. So, who were these people, and why did they create these bizarre works of art? The leading theory is that they were a priestly class, or a ruling elite, who created these magnificent objects for religious or ritualistic purposes. The large stylized eyes on the masks and heads could be a way of depicting a spiritual or divine sight. The large bronze figure could be a shaman, a god, or a king, who was seen as a link between the human world and the spiritual world. The discovery of large amounts of elephant tusks in the pits suggests that these animals were a part of their culture, either as sacred animals or as sources of ivory for trade. A quirky or fringe tidbit in this area is the theory that the large, eerie bronze heads with the bulging eyes and strange masks were an attempt by the artists to depict a race of aliens. I mean, you can't deny they look a little bit like the aliens from the Alien movies, can you? It's a fun thought, even if it has absolutely no basis in reality. The problem is that the Sangqingdui civilization left no written records. They were a literate society, but their writing system, if they had one, has yet to be discovered. This means we have no names, no stories, and no accounts of their beliefs or their history. We are left to piece together their story from the objects they left behind. The sudden and dramatic end of the civilization is another major mystery. Sometime around 1000 BCE, the entire culture seems to have just stopped. The city was abandoned. The magnificent bronze artifacts were all ritually destroyed and buried. What caused this? Was it a natural disaster, like an earthquake or a flood? Was it a foreign invasion? Or was it a civil war or an internal power struggle that led to the city's abandonment? Historians still argue whether the Sansing-Dui culture was a precursor to the better-known Chinese dynasties, or if it was an isolated independent entity. The artifacts bear no resemblance to the art and culture of the Shang dynasty, which was flourishing at the same time in northern China. This suggests that the Sansing-Dui civilization was not a part of the mainstream Chinese cultural development, but was, in fact, a separate and distinct entity. The story of the Sansing-Dui civilization is a powerful reminder of how much of human history is still lost to us. For over 3,000 years, this culture, with its magnificent art and advanced bronze technology, was completely forgotten. It existed, it thrived, and then it vanished, leaving behind only these magnificent silent sculptures to tell its story. It forces us to reconsider the timeline of Chinese history and to wonder what other hidden civilizations are still buried, waiting to be discovered. It's a beautiful, frustrating mystery. We have all the pieces of the puzzle, but we have no idea what the finished picture is supposed to look like. The bronze heads, with their haunting, wide eyes, seem to stare at us, daring us to understand them, to figure out who they were and why they left such a strange and beautiful legacy behind. They are a ghost civilization, a testament to the fact that history is not a continuous line, but a series of brilliant, forgotten flashes. We've seen civilizations vanish and armies disappear. Now, let's talk about a ghost. Not a spiritual ghost, but a ghost ship, a vessel found drifting on the high seas with no one on board. This is the story of the Mary Celeste, a brigantine found sailing aimlessly in the Atlantic Ocean in 1872. The ship was in perfect condition, its cargo was intact, and a half-eaten meal was still on the table. But the crew, all 10 of them, were gone. They had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a maritime mystery that has baffled sailors and historians for nearly 150 years. So put on your metaphorical sea boots, and let's climb aboard this silent ship and try to figure out what happened. The story begins in November of 1872. The Mary Celeste was a 100-foot-long ship that had set sail from New York, bound for Genoa, Italy, with a cargo of 1,601 barrels of denatured alcohol. On board were Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and a crew of 7. All was well as they set sail, and the journey seemed to be going smoothly. The ship was well provisioned, the crew was experienced, and the weather was good. On December 5th, 1872, another ship, the British brigantine Dei Gratia, spotted the Mary Celeste about 400 miles east of the Azores. The crew of the Dei Gratia noticed that the Mary Celeste was sailing erratically. It was heading toward Africa, a strange and unlikely course. They hailed the ship, but there was no response. After watching it for 2 hours, the captain of the Dei Gratia, a man named Morehouse, decided to investigate. He sent a small party of men over to the ship. What they found was truly eerie. The ship was in a state of suspended animation. Everything was in its proper place. The sails were partially set, the rigging was in good order, and the ship was still seaworthy. The personal belongings of the crew, including their pipes and boots, were still in their cabins. The captain's log was on his desk, its last entry dated November 25th, 10 days earlier. The 6-month supply of food and water was still in the hold. A half-eaten meal was on the table in the crew's galley. The only things missing were the captain's chronometer, a sextant, and the ship's sole lifeboat, which appeared to have been launched with a crew of 7, leaving Captain Briggs, his wife, and their daughter behind. It was as if everyone had just dropped what they were doing and left in a hurry. A mainstream historical fact is that the Mary Celeste was found in this condition, and the crew was never seen again. So what happened to them? The mystery has led to countless theories, some of which are so wild they're almost comical. The most popular one, and a frequent subject of pulp fiction, is that the ship was attacked by a giant squid or some other sea monster. Another equally fanciful theory is that the crew was abducted by aliens. As a quirky or fringe tidbit, some have even suggested a mutiny, where the crew took the lifeboat and left the captain and his family to their fate. But there's no evidence of a struggle, and it seems unlikely that a mutiny would have been so clean. No one was hurt, and the ship was left in perfect condition. The more plausible theories are still based on speculation. One idea is that the crew had to abandon ship due to a weather-related event. A sudden, violent squall could have caused a problem with the ship, and the crew would have had to get into the lifeboat to wait it out. But why would they leave the captain, his wife, and their daughter behind? It doesn't add up. The most compelling and most widely accepted theory is that a gaseous explosion, caused by the denatured alcohol in the cargo hold, forced the crew to abandon ship. The barrels were made of red oak, which is a porous wood. They were also not sealed perfectly, so the alcohol could have seeped out, and the fumes could have built up. The theory suggests that a small, contained explosion happened in the hold, perhaps a sound and a rush of air, which spooked the crew into thinking the ship was about to blow up. They would have lowered the lifeboat and waited for the air to clear. The captain, in an abundance of caution, would have taken his family with him. The problem is that the explosion, if it happened at all, would have been contained in the hold, and there would be no reason to abandon a perfectly good ship. And if there was an explosion, why was there no damage to the ship? No scorch marks, no broken barrels. It's a compelling but ultimately flawed theory. Another theory is that the captain, in a moment of panic, ordered the crew into the lifeboat because he thought the ship was sinking. The ship's pumps were working fine, but the Mary Celeste had a history of flooding. The captain may have seen an unusual amount of water in the hold, and in a fit of fear, ordered everyone to get off the ship. But again, why leave the captain and his family behind? And if they were in the lifeboat, why didn't they try to get back on the ship when they realised it was fine? This is where the open scholarly debate comes in. Historians still argue whether the Mary Celeste was a victim of a natural event, or if the crew were somehow responsible for their own disappearance. The fact that the ship's lifeboat was missing suggests that the crew left on their own free will. But why would they abandon a seaworthy vessel? Was it a momentary panic, a misunderstanding, a ghost? We will never know for sure. The mystery of the Mary Celeste is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most mundane of reasons, a miscalculation, a bad decision, a moment of panic, can lead to the most enduring of mysteries. The story of the Mary Celeste is not about a grand conspiracy or a supernatural event. It's about an empty ship, a silent ocean, and a haunting question that remains unanswered. It reminds us that some of history's greatest riddles are not a matter of what happened, but of why. The ship sailed on, a ghost on the water, a silent tomb for a secret that will forever remain in the depths. From the silent seas, we now turn to the grimy, gaslit streets of Victorian London. It's 1888, and a terrifying figure is stalking the dark alleys of Whitechapel. A string of brutal murders, targeting poor women, has gripped the city in a panic, and the police are powerless to stop it. This is the story of Jack the Ripper, the world's most famous unsolved serial killer. He left a trail of terror, a set of cryptic clues, and a name that has become synonymous with evil. So let's dim the lights, check to make sure the door is locked, and walk through the foggy streets of the East End, where a killer hides in the shadows, and his identity remains a secret. The mainstream historical fact is that between August and November of 1888, at least 5 women were brutally murdered in the Whitechapel district of London. The victims were all prostitutes, and their bodies were mutilated in a way that suggested the killer had some knowledge of human anatomy. The victims are known as the Canonical Five: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. The murders were so savage and so public that they generated a frenzy of media attention, and for the first time in history, a serial killer became a worldwide celebrity. The police were under immense pressure to find the killer, but every lead seemed to go nowhere. The killer was given the name Jack the Ripper, after a letter was sent to a London news agency, signed by the name. The letter, which was written in a macabre and taunting tone, claimed responsibility for the murders. It was followed by another letter, and then by a postcard, all signed by Jack the Ripper. The police and the public were now terrified of a man they believed to be a sadistic genius. A famous and quirky tidbit in this area is the Dear Boss letter. The letter, which was sent to the Central News Agency on September 27th, 1888, was the first time the name Jack the Ripper was used. The killer, or a very sick prankster, wrote, I shall not quit till I have an opportunity of getting out the last of the lot, for I am a good surgeon, and my work is a beautiful piece of butchery. It was a truly terrifying taunt, and it fueled the public's imagination. The police had a number of suspects, but the evidence was always circumstantial. The investigation was hampered by a number of things: the lack of forensic technology at the time, the large number of people in the area who fit the profile of a suspect, and the overwhelming fear that was gripping the city. The suspects came from all walks of life. A few names stand out. There was Montague John Druitt, a barrister who committed suicide in December of 1888, around the same time the murders stopped. He was a prime suspect for a while, but there was no real evidence to connect him to the crimes. Then there was Aaron Kosminski, a Polish barber who was institutionalized for mental illness. A police inspector at the time identified him as a suspect, but there was never enough evidence to convict him. The last one on the list is Prince Albert Victor, the grandson of Queen Victoria. This is a very fringe theory, but a popular one. The idea is that the prince was a homosexual who had contracted syphilis and was driven to madness, killing prostitutes as a way of lashing out. It's a compelling, but almost certainly untrue theory. It's the kind of thing that makes for a great Netflix documentary, but it's not supported by any historical evidence. So, what's the truth? The open scholarly debate here is whether the Dear Boss letter and the others were a genuine communication from the killer, or if they were an elaborate hoax perpetrated by a journalist. Most experts today believe that they were a hoax. The letters were a brilliant piece of media manipulation that created a terrifying and very marketable brand for the killer. But even if the letters were a hoax, the murders were very real, and the killer's identity remains a mystery. Why did he stop? This is another great unknown. The murders, after Mary Jane Kelly's death in November 1888, just stopped. Did he die? Was he institutionalized? Did he get caught, but the police kept it a secret to avoid a public panic? Did he simply stop killing? We don't know. The silence that followed the murders is almost as terrifying as the murders themselves. The legacy of Jack the Ripper is not just in the Unsolved case, but in the way it has influenced our culture. He was the first serial killer to become a superstar, a figure of morbid fascination. The case created a new genre of crime journalism and gave birth to the modern murder mystery. He became a character in novels, films and video games. He's a terrifying, almost mythical figure. He's the boogeyman, a ghost in the annals of criminal history. He's an example of a mainstream historical fact, the murders, with a fringe tidbit, the identity of the killer, that we will likely never solve. The search for the Ripper's identity is an ongoing obsession for amateur detectives and professional historians. The case files are still open, the suspects are still being analysed, but the truth, the real truth, is probably lost to time. The fog of Victorian London, the lack of forensic technology, and the sheer number of people who could have been the killer all conspire to make the case one of the most enduring riddles in history. He's a perfect example of a mystery that is better left unsolved, a dark, terrifying story that continues to haunt us, a reminder that some secrets are meant to be kept forever. We've been to the fog-shrouded streets of London. Now let's go to a place of stark, sun-scorched emptiness. We're going to the Nazca Desert in Peru to stand on a high plateau and look down at one of the world's most spectacular and perplexing mysteries, the Nazca Lines. These are not artifacts you can hold, or buildings you can enter. They're giant geoglyphs, vast drawings etched into the desert floor, so large that they can only be seen from the air. This is a mystery of scale, of intention, and of a people whose purpose we may never truly understand. The mainstream historical fact is that the Nazca Lines were created by the Nazca culture, which flourished in the region from around 100 BCE to 800 CE. They were a sophisticated people, skilled in ceramics, textiles, and, apparently, large-scale earth art. The lines are made by scraping away the reddish-brown top layer of the desert soil to reveal the lighter, sand-coloured earth below. The dry, windless conditions of the Nazca Plateau have preserved them for over 1,000 years. There are thousands of them, from simple lines and geometric shapes to complex stylized drawings of animals, plants and other figures. The most famous ones include a hummingbird, a spider, a monkey, a tree, and a human-like figure with 2 large eyes, sometimes called the astronaut. The drawings are immense, some of them stretching for hundreds of feet. The largest ones are over a mile long. And that's the central puzzle. Why would people spend so much time and effort creating something they couldn't possibly appreciate from the ground? It's like painting a mural on the roof of a skyscraper. You can't see the whole thing unless you're way up in the sky. So, what were they for? This is where the theories, some of them wonderfully bizarre, begin. The most famous and most fringe theory is that the lines were landing strips for alien spacecraft, or a message to extraterrestrial beings. This idea, popularised by the Swiss author Erich von Däniken in his book Chariots of the Gods, suggests that the Nazca people were influenced by or were in contact with aliens. The astronaut figure, the long straight lines that look like runways, and the fact that the figures can only be seen from the air, all seem to point to this otherworldly explanation. It's a great piece of pop culture, and a wonderful example of a quirky tidbit that has captured the public's imagination, but it has no basis in scientific or archaeological evidence. There are no scorch marks, no debris from alien spacecraft, and no other signs of an extraterrestrial visit. The lines are also far too soft to be used as landing strips for anything heavier than a hot air balloon. So, if not aliens, what was their purpose? The most widely accepted academic theory is that the lines were a form of ritual or ceremony related to water. This makes a lot of sense. The Nazca culture lived in one of the driest places on Earth, and their survival would have been dependent on finding and controlling water. A famous and mainstream historical fact is that the Nazca people were masters of irrigation and underground water systems. They built a series of underground aqueducts called puquios to bring water from the mountains to their settlements. The geoglyphs, some historians argue, were part of this ritual. The animals they depicted, the spider, the hummingbird, the monkey, are all associated with water, rain, and fertility in local mythology. The long straight lines could have been processional walkways, a way for the Nazca people to walk in a ritualistic path as they prayed for rain. The lines could have been a way of communicating with the gods, a way of showing them how much they revered water. Another popular theory is that the Nazca lines were used for astronomical purposes similar to Stonehenge. This is a very compelling idea. Some of the figures and lines seem to align with the rising and setting of certain stars or constellations. The monkey, for example, is said to be aligned with the stars of the Big Dipper. The spider is thought to be aligned with Orion. The idea is that the lines were a giant open-air calendar or an astrological map used to track the seasons and predict celestial events. This is another example of an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the Nazca lines were a complex astronomical calendar or a series of ritualistic paths related to the water cult. It's very possible that they were both. The ancient world often combined the scientific with the spiritual, and the Nazca people were no exception. Then there is the theory that the lines were simply a form of artistic expression, a way for the Nazca people to express their beliefs and their identity. The lines are beautiful, and they show a mastery of geometric principles and design. They could have been a form of public art, a way for the Nazca to create something of beauty for themselves and their gods. This theory is a little more mundane, but it's still compelling. It suggests that the Nazca people created these magnificent works of art simply because they could, because they had the time and the skill to do it. The mystery of the Nazca lines is not just about their purpose, but also about the people who made them. How did they do it? How did they create a perfect circle? How did they manage to draw a flawless straight line that was miles long? They didn't have airplanes or hot air balloons. The most likely explanation is that they used a series of ropes and stakes to create a scaled-down model on the ground, and then used that model to replicate the design on a much larger scale. It's a simple and brilliant piece of engineering, and it shows just how sophisticated the Nazca people were. The Nazca lines are a testament to a civilization that left no written records, but left behind a breathtaking and completely baffling legacy. They are a ghost on the landscape, a silent question mark etched into the desert floor. They force us to confront the limits of our knowledge and to remember that there are still so many riddles from the past that are just waiting to be solved. And sometimes the answer is not a single, neat solution, but a complex tapestry of rituals, beliefs, and artistic expression. We've walked among the silent geoglyphs of the Nazca. Now, let's go from the desert floor to the freezing depths of a revolution. We are travelling to early 20th century Russia, to a time of immense social and political upheaval, and to a mystery that is as much about human greed as it is about history. This is the story of the lost Romanov treasure, the missing jewels and riches of the last Russian imperial family, lost amidst the chaos of the Bolshevik Revolution. It's a tale of fabulous wealth, betrayal, and a hunt for a treasure that has never been found. The mainstream historical fact is that the Romanov dynasty ruled Russia for over 300 years. By the time of the last Tsar, Nicholas II, the family was one of the wealthiest in the world. Their palaces were filled with priceless art, priceless jewels, and a staggering amount of gold. The imperial crown jewels alone were a collection of diamonds, rubies, and emeralds that would be worth billions today. But their wealth was a symbol of their immense power, a power that was about to be taken away from them. In 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution swept through Russia, and the Romanovs were placed under house arrest. The family, including Tsar Nicholas II, Tsarina Alexandra, and their 5 children, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Alexei, were moved from palace to palace and finally ended up in the city of Yekaterinburg. They knew their lives were in danger, but they were also a family that was used to a life of luxury. They had their personal jewellery with them. A famous and quirky tidbit is that the Tsarina and her daughters sewed some of their most valuable jewels into the linings of their clothing, believing that the jewels would protect them from bullets or that they could be used to bribe their way to freedom. On the night of July 17th, 1918, the entire family was murdered by their Bolshevik captors in the cellar of a house in Yekaterinburg. Their bodies were dismembered and thrown into a series of pits, and the jewels, which had been sewn into their clothing, were stripped from their bodies and taken away. The execution and the burial of the Romanovs is a mainstream historical fact, but the fate of the vast majority of their wealth is not. So what happened to the Romanov treasure? The imperial crown jewels were recovered by the Bolsheviks and are now on display in the Kremlin. But what about the rest of the Romanov family's vast personal fortune? The millions of rubles, the gold coins, the jewellery, the artworks, the Fabergé eggs. Where did it all go? One theory, which is the most plausible and most widely accepted, is that the treasure was simply looted and sold off by the Bolsheviks to fund their new government. The Bolsheviks were desperate for money to consolidate their power and to fight the Russian Civil War. The Romanov family's wealth would have been a massive windfall for them. The jewels and gold would have been easy to sell on the international market, and a lot of it probably ended up in the hands of wealthy collectors in Europe and America. This is a good example of an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the Romanovs' treasure was methodically sold off by the Bolsheviks or was simply lost and dispersed during the chaos of the revolution. The truth is probably a bit of both. Some of the treasure was likely sold in an official capacity, while other parts were likely stolen by individuals and disappeared into the underground market. But there are other, more romantic and less likely theories. The most famous one involves a train. The story goes that in 1918, as the Bolsheviks were closing in on the city of Kazan, the White Army, which was loyal to the Tsar, loaded the vast gold reserves of the Russian Empire onto a train and tried to get it to Siberia. They were being pursued by the Bolsheviks, and according to the legend, the train with the gold on it disappeared somewhere in the vastness of the Siberian wilderness. It's a powerful cinematic image, and a perfect example of a quirky or fringe tidbit. Some people believe that the train with the gold is still out there, buried in a frozen lake or a deep snowdrift, just waiting for a treasure hunter to find it. The truth is, there is no historical evidence that a train with the gold on it ever disappeared. The gold reserves of the Russian Empire were largely accounted for, and most of it was eventually sold off by the Bolsheviks. Another theory, a less dramatic one, is that the Romanovs themselves hid some of their fortune before they were captured. The family had a long period of time under house arrest, and it's possible that they were able to hide some of their wealth with loyal servants or in secret locations. There have been countless stories of former Romanov servants or guards who claim to have a piece of the family's treasure, but none of these claims have ever been verified. It's a sad and poignant thought that the family, in their final months, were desperately trying to save a part of their legacy from a world that was determined to destroy it. The mystery of the lost Romanov treasure is not just about the money, it's about the end of an era, the last gasp of an ancient dynasty. The missing treasure is a symbol of the immense wealth that was lost in the chaos of the revolution. It's a haunting reminder of the fact that even the most powerful families can lose everything in an instant. The story of the Romanovs is a tragedy, and the missing treasure is a final lingering question mark. a testament to the fact that some of history's greatest secrets are not hidden in tombs or on deserted islands, but are simply lost to the maelstrom of time and human greed. The jewels, the gold, the art, all of it is gone. A silent ghost in the annals of history, a tantalizing treasure that will likely never be found. We've searched for lost empires and missing treasures. Now, let's travel to a place that once held a vast, thriving civilization, a place that was just as complex and powerful as ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. We're going to the Indus Valley to stand before a silent, beautiful script that has defied all attempts at translation. This is the story of a forgotten language, a vanished people, and a riddle that, if solved, could completely change our understanding of ancient history. The mainstream historical fact is that the Indus Valley Civilization, also known as the Harappan Civilization, flourished from around 3300 BCE to 1300 BCE. At its peak, it was one of the three great early civilizations of the world, alongside ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. It was a massive civilization, with an estimated population of over 5 million people. It was a sophisticated, well-planned society, with cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa featuring advanced urban planning, sanitation systems, and a complex system of trade. But unlike the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians, who left behind a vast body of written records, the Indus Valley people left behind only a short, baffling script. The script is not found on large stone tablets or in grand libraries. It is found on small hand-carved seals, small clay tablets, and small copper plates. There are over 4,000 of these artifacts, and they contain a total of around 400 distinct signs. The signs are a combination of symbols and what appear to be pictographs depicting animals, people, and objects. The longest inscription is only 26 signs long. This is the central mystery. We have a civilization that was capable of building massive cities and trading with distant lands, but they left behind no long-form writing. We have a language, but we have no way of reading it. So, what does it say? And why did they only write in such short inscriptions? The theories are plentiful, and they're as varied as the signs themselves. The most widely accepted and most academic theory is that the script is a form of logographic writing, where each symbol represents a word or a concept. This is a good example of an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the Indus Valley script is a form of true writing, or if it is a system of symbols used for ritualistic or economic purposes. The short length of the inscription suggests that they were not used to write long stories or historical accounts, but were used for a specific and perhaps very limited purpose. The most common theory is that they were used for trade. The seals, which are found in cities all over the Indus Valley and even in Mesopotamia, could have been a form of proto-writing used to identify a merchant, a product, or a specific transaction. A little bit like a modern-day trademark or a label. The seals could have been a way of certifying a product or a shipment. But if it's a form of writing, why can't we read it? The problem is that there is no Rosetta Stone for the Indus Valley script. The Rosetta Stone, as you may remember, was a tablet that had the same inscription written in 3 different languages, including Greek, which scholars could read. This allowed them to finally crack the code of Egyptian hieroglyphs. For the Indus Valley script, we have no such a key. We have no bilingual inscriptions, no long text that could give us a hint as to the grammar or syntax. The short nature of the inscriptions means we can't even tell if the script is written from left to right, or from right to left. Another theory, and a rather fringe tidbit, is that the script is not a form of writing at all, but a form of ritualistic or religious symbolism. The signs are found on objects that appear to have a ritualistic purpose, and some of the symbols, like the unicorn-like creature that appears on many of the seals, are clearly part of their religious beliefs. So the theory goes that the script is a form of religious symbolism, a way of communicating with the gods, or a way of marking a sacred object. It's a compelling idea, but it's hard to prove. How do you translate a religious symbol when you don't even know what the religion is? Another theory, and one that has gained a lot of traction recently, is that the script is related to a language that is still spoken today. The most common candidate is Dravidian, a family of languages spoken in southern India. The idea is that the Indus Valley people were an early form of Dravidian speakers, and that the language has been lost but the script could be deciphered with the right key. This is a very intriguing idea, but the link is purely hypothetical. The sudden end of the Indus Valley civilization is as mysterious as its script. Sometime around 1800 BCE, the cities began to decline. The reasons for this are not clear. Was it a natural disaster? A change in climate? A shift in the monsoons that made agriculture impossible? Or was it an invasion by a group of people from the north, the so-called Aryans? The decline and collapse of the civilization meant that its language was lost to history. The mystery of the Indus Valley script is a great example of the vast gaps in our historical knowledge. We have a civilization that built cities and traded with the world, and yet we have no way of reading their thoughts, their stories, or their history. They are a silent, beautiful ghost in the annals of history, a civilization whose secrets are locked in a script we cannot read. And until we find that key, that lost Rosetta Stone, the Indus Valley people will remain silent, their magnificent civilization a beautiful and enduring riddle. From the silent, forgotten script of the Indus Valley, we turn now to a face that has stared out at the sands of Egypt for millennia. A face that is part lion, part human, and a complete mystery. We're going to the Giza Plateau to stand before the colossal statue of the Great Sphinx. The mystery here is not what it is, but how old it is. The traditional and widely accepted view is that the Sphinx was built by the pharaoh Khafre, around 2500 BCE. But what if it's much, much older? What if this ancient creature, with its calm, enigmatic face, has been watching over the desert for not 4,500 years, but for 10,000 years or more? This is a story that pits mainstream archaeology against a fringe theory that could rewrite the history of human civilization. The mainstream historical fact is that the Great Sphinx was built by the ancient Egyptians during the Old Kingdom. The most common theory is that it was commissioned by the pharaoh Khafre, whose pyramid is right next to it. The face of the Sphinx is believed to be a portrait of Khafre himself, and the colossal statue was likely meant to be a guardian of the pharaoh's tomb and a symbol of his divine power. The Sphinx is a massive monument, over 240 feet long and 66 feet high, carved out of a single piece of limestone bedrock. The statue and the temples around it were all built around the same time, and the evidence seems to point to a single builder, Khafre. But here's where the story gets interesting. In the early 1990s, an American geologist named Robert Schoch looked at the Sphinx with a different set of eyes. He wasn't a historian or an archaeologist. He was a geologist, and he saw something that the others had missed: erosion. He argued that the Sphinx and its enclosure showed signs of water erosion, not wind and sand erosion, as had long been assumed. The deep, vertical fissures on the side of the Sphinx's body, he claimed, could only have been caused by thousands of years of heavy rainfall. He pointed out that the last time Egypt had experienced such a wet, rainy climate was at the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 to 5,000 BCE. His theory, the Sphinx was not built by the Egyptians of the Old Kingdom, but by a much older, lost civilization. This is a fringe tidbit that completely upends the traditional view of ancient history. If the Sphinx is 10,000 years old, it means that a sophisticated, technologically advanced civilization existed thousands of years before the accepted date for the rise of complex human societies. It would mean that there was a civilization that was capable of moving and carving massive stones thousands of years before the Egyptians built the pyramids. It would force us to completely rethink the origins of human civilization. Now, Schoch's theory is not without its critics. The mainstream archaeological community has pushed back hard. They argue that the erosion on the Sphinx was caused by a number of factors, including the natural flow of groundwater, flooding, and the poor quality of the limestone. They point out that a few hundred years of a wet period is enough to cause significant erosion, and that the Sphinx has been submerged in water and later buried in sand for thousands of years, which would also have contributed to the erosion. They also argue that there is no archaeological evidence of a lost civilization in the area that could have built the Sphinx. No tools, no settlements, no other monuments. Just the Sphinx, sitting alone on the Giza Plateau. This is a perfect example of an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the Sphinx is a monument from the Old Kingdom of Egypt or a much older relic of a lost civilization. The geological evidence is compelling, but the archaeological evidence is non-existent. It's a classic case of two disciplines looking at the same thing and seeing two completely different stories. The geologists see rain and erosion, a long, slow process that speaks to a much older monument. The archaeologists see a lack of a single other artifact, a lack of a single other shred of evidence that points to an earlier civilization. What makes this mystery so captivating is that it forces us to question what we think we know. We have a neat, tidy timeline for the history of human civilization. We have the rise of the Sumerians and the Egyptians, the development of writing, the building of the great monuments. But what if that timeline is wrong? What if there were civilizations that rose and fell before we even started to keep track of them? The Sphinx, with its quiet, unblinking eyes, seems to hold the answer. It's a silent witness to a past that we may never fully understand. The debate over the age of the Sphinx is a testament to the fact that some of history's greatest secrets are not a matter of missing information, but a matter of interpretation. The Sphinx is there for all to see. We just can't agree on what it's telling us. Is it a grand artistic portrait of a powerful pharaoh? Or is it a last lonely remnant of a world that we have completely forgotten? The answer, for now, is lost to the sands of time. We've seen a silent sphinx, a forgotten script, and a ghost ship. Now, let's go back to the sea, to a place where not just one ship, but hundreds have disappeared. We're going to the Bermuda Triangle, a mythical stretch of ocean in the western North Atlantic, where planes and ships have famously vanished without a trace. It's a place of legend, of fear, and of some of the most bizarre and inexplicable vanishings in modern history. So, let's get on our metaphorical plane, and let's fly into the heart of the mystery. The Bermuda Triangle, also known as the Devil's Triangle, is a loosely defined region that extends from Bermuda to Miami, and then to San Juan, Puerto Rico. The mainstream historical fact is that over the past century, a number of ships and aircraft have disappeared in this region, leading to a number of books, documentaries, and TV shows that have turned the area into a pop culture phenomenon. The total number of disappearances is hard to quantify, but the most famous cases are the ones that have captured the public's imagination. The most famous of all the vanishings is that of Flight 19, a squadron of 5 US Navy TBM Avenger torpedo bombers that disappeared on December 5, 1945. The flight, a routine training mission, was led by an experienced pilot, Lieutenant Charles Taylor. The squadron was flying from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to a point over the Bahamas and back. But something went wrong. Taylor radioed in to say that he was lost. He said that his compasses were not working, and that he could not find the shore. He also said that the sea looked strange, that it was not what it was supposed to look like. The flight then seemed to fly in random directions, and the messages from Taylor became more and more frantic. The last message from the flight was, "We are entering white water. Nothing seems right. We don't know where we are. The water is green, no white." After that, nothing. A search plane was sent to find them, but it also disappeared. What happened? This is where the theories, some of them wonderfully bizarre, begin. The most popular and most fringe theory is that the Bermuda Triangle is a place of paranormal or extraterrestrial activity. The idea, popularized in the 1970s, is that there is a kind of vortex or a time warp in the region that causes ships and planes to disappear. Some people believe that there is a portal to another dimension, a place where aliens come to abduct humans, or a place where a lost civilization like Atlantis is using crystals to power their technology, causing strange magnetic anomalies. The white water and green water that Taylor described could be a glimpse into this other dimension. It's a fun, exciting, and completely unproven theory. Another theory, and one that is a bit more grounded in science, is that the disappearances are caused by methane hydrates on the seafloor. This is a very interesting and quirky tidbit. Methane hydrates are a frozen form of methane gas that is trapped in the sediment on the ocean floor. The theory suggests that if these hydrates were to be released perhaps by a sudden geological event, they could create a large plume of gas that would rise to the surface. The gas would lower the density of the water, causing ships to lose their buoyancy and sink. The gas could also rise into the air, where it could be sucked into the engines of a plane, causing the engine to fail. It's a compelling idea, but there is no evidence that this has ever happened, and there are methane hydrate deposits all over the world, but the disappearances are only happening in the Bermuda Triangle. Now, for the most boring and most plausible explanation, the disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle are just a coincidence. The area is one of the most heavily trafficked shipping lanes in the world. It's also an area that is prone to hurricanes, storms, and unpredictable weather. A mainstream historical fact is that the vast majority of the disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle can be attributed to natural causes. A few disappearances can be attributed to human error, faulty equipment, or a combination of both. This is a good example of an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle are a result of natural phenomena or if they are simply a statistical anomaly in a heavily trafficked region. The truth is, the Bermuda Triangle is no more dangerous than any other heavily trafficked area in the world. The disappearances that have been so sensationalized by the media are a result of a combination of a lack of information, a lot of misinformation, and a public that is willing to believe in the extraordinary. The story of the Bermuda Triangle is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most compelling mysteries are the ones that don't exist at all. We want to believe that there is something out there, something more than just a coincidence. We want to believe that a place on Earth can have a personality, a dark, mysterious personality that can make ships and planes disappear. But the truth is, the ocean is a vast and unforgiving place, and sometimes things just get lost. The Bermuda Triangle is not a place of magic or aliens, it's just a place of legend, a myth that has become more famous than the truth. It's a reminder that we can't always trust what we see on TV. We have to look at the facts. The story of the Bermuda Triangle is a beautiful, if completely unproven, mystery. It speaks to our deep-seated need to believe that there is something more out there, something that we can't explain. It's a testament to the power of a good story, and the fact that a little bit of mystery can go a long, long way. The ships and planes are gone, and so is the truth. We've sailed through mythical seas, explored forgotten civilizations, and flown through a mysterious triangle. Now, let's go to a different kind of darkness. The chilling, anonymous terror of a serial killer who taunted the police and the public for years and was never caught. We're going to the late 1960s and early 1970s to Northern California to the story of the Zodiac Killer. He left a trail of blood, a series of bizarre and cryptic letters, and a mystery that continues to haunt the American imagination. So lock the doors, turn on all the lights, and let's try to decipher the final, and perhaps most frustrating, riddle of all. The mainstream historical fact is that the Zodiac Killer is responsible for at least 5 murders in the Bay Area between December 1968 and October 1969. The victims were young men and women, often attacked in secluded romantic locations. The attacks were brutal, and the killer seemed to enjoy the chase and the thrill of the hunt. The killer's first confirmed victims were a teenage couple, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, who were shot to death in a lover's lane in a suburb of San Francisco on December 20th, 1968. The killer struck again on July 4th, 1969, shooting another couple, Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau. Mageau survived to give a description of the killer. The third attack was on Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard in Lake Berryessa. They were stabbed repeatedly, and Shepard died from her injuries. The final confirmed victim was a taxi driver, Paul Stein, who was shot to death in his cab in San Francisco. But the Zodiac Killer wasn't content with just killing. He wanted to play a game. The day after the second murder, he started sending letters to local newspapers. The letters were a taunt, a brag, and a terrifying riddle. They were written in a macabre and cryptic tone, and they included ciphers or coded messages that he dared the police to solve. One of the most famous and chilling lines from the letters was, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all to kill." This is a famous and very unsettling fact. The letters were a direct communication between the killer and the public, a way for him to control the narrative and to create a sense of fear and helplessness. The police and the FBI worked tirelessly to solve the ciphers. The first one, a 408-symbol message, was solved by a high school teacher and his wife. The message, as you might expect, was a disturbing rant about killing and a promise of more to come. But the second cipher, a 340-symbol message, known as the Zodiac 340, has remained unsolved for over 50 years. This is a crucial and quirky tidbit. The unsolved cipher is a constant nagging mystery. It's a key that could unlock a treasure trove of information, but no one has ever been able to crack it. The killer also sent a number of other letters, some of which were just a series of symbols, and others were just a note to say that he was still out there. The last confirmed letter from the Zodiac Killer was in 1974. After that, he simply stopped. So, who was he? The police had a number of suspects over the years, but the evidence was always circumstantial. The most famous suspect is Arthur Lee Allen, a convicted child molester who lived in Vallejo, a city where a number of the attacks took place. He was a long-time suspect, and the police had a mountain of circumstantial evidence against him. He owned a Zodiac brand watch. He was a fan of the novel The Most Dangerous Game, which the killer referenced. He even had a knife that was similar to the one used in the Lake Berryessa attack. But the evidence was never strong enough to convict him. The handwriting on his letters didn't match the handwriting of the Zodiac, and a DNA test from a stamp on one of the letters, conducted after his death, was inconclusive. He died in 1992, and the case against him was dropped. Another major suspect was Richard Gaikowski, a journalist who worked for a newspaper that the Zodiac sent letters to. He was a fringe suspect for a while, but a few amateur detectives and a documentary filmmaker became convinced he was the killer. The evidence against him was also circumstantial, and he was never formally charged. There were many others, but none of them ever came close to being a smoking gun. Why did he stop killing? This is another great unknown. The last confirmed attack was in 1969, and the last confirmed letter was in 1974. Did he die? Was he institutionalized? Did he get caught for another crime and was unable to continue his killing spree? Or did he simply stop? We don't know. The silence that followed the murders is almost as chilling as the murders themselves. It's an example of a mainstream historical fact, the murders, with an open scholarly debate. Historians and armchair detectives still argue whether the Zodiac's confirmed victims were the only ones he killed, or if he was responsible for many more murders that were never linked to him. The killer claimed to have killed 37 people, but the police have only ever been able to confirm 5. Did he just get bored? Did he move to another city and continue his reign of terror there? We don't know. The legacy of the Zodiac Killer is not just in the Unsolved case, but in the way it has influenced our culture. He was a master of media manipulation, a killer who understood the power of a good story. He became a character in novels and films. He's a symbol of the dark side of human nature, a reminder that some people are simply evil, and that there are some riddles that we will never be able to solve. The search for the Zodiac's identity is an ongoing obsession for amateur detectives and professional historians. The case files are still open, the suspects are still being analysed, but the truth, the real truth, is probably lost to time. The fog of the Bay Area, the lack of forensic technology at the time, and the sheer number of people who could have been the killer all conspire to make the case one of the most enduring riddles in history. He's a perfect example of a mystery that is better left unsolved. A dark, terrifying story that continues to haunt us. A reminder that some secrets are meant to be kept forever. So, with the last mystery hanging in the air like a phantom on a moonless night, we come to the end of our long journey together. We've wandered through ancient forgotten cities, stood on the edges of vast empty oceans, and peered into the shadows of a past that is still very much alive. We've seen that some of history's greatest stories are not written in books, but are carved in stone, or etched into the desert floor, or are simply missing, a blank space on a map. The questions we've asked tonight, about a lost city, a missing army, and a killer's identity, are not just about finding an answer. They're about the joy of the search, the thrill of the chase, and the humbling realization that our knowledge of the past is far from complete. There is so much that we don't know, so many stories that are still waiting to be told. So, as you get ready to drift off, think about the silence of the Mary Celeste, the ghost of the Romanov treasure, and the unreadable script of the Indus Valley. The world is full of these quiet, beautiful riddles, and the most important thing is not to solve them, but to appreciate the fact that they are there. They are a constant reminder that the world is a place of wonder, a place of mystery, and a place of endless possibility. Now let that quiet wonder settle into your bones. Let the unanswered questions fade into the hum of the fan. Let your mind become a calm, still ocean. And with that, my friend, it's time to rest. Sweet dreams.